Thanks, Sonia, and thank you for the invitation to speak today. So, yes, you've mentioned sort of my role at Evotec. So, I kind of wear two hats. Yeah, one looking after our R&D site just south of Oxford on Milton Park, where we have about 700 scientists supporting early discovery through to commercial API manufacturing. But my functional role is really focused on academic partnerships and particularly a model for building partnerships between academic institutions, investment partners, and Evotec to progress early stage therapeutic discoveries from universities and research institutions to a level of proof of concept where we can then create new companies or license out those assets to relevant partners. So what I'd like to do today is to provide, firstly, a very brief introduction to Evotec, as conscious that not all of you will be familiar with the organization, but then to talk through the bridge model, as we call it, for academic therapeutics translation, where it started, how it's evolved, where it is now, some of the outcomes, and how we can see that developing into the future. And then finally, what I'd like to do is just mention briefly some of the work that I'm leading with other stakeholders, 10U, Knowledge Exchange UK, Universities Alliance, and the Russell Group, looking at the broader proof of concept landscape in the UK, how we can potentially improve that in terms of funding, but also best practice in deploying or deployment and governance of proof of concept funding. So very much looking forward to feedback from you all on this. And with that, I will share the slides. Okay, hopefully those are visible to everybody. Okay. Is that visible, Sonia, to?
It's visible. It's just not on presenter mode, but it is visible.
Right.
So it's just to put it onto.
I never quite understand why it appears on this one. So uh, I may have to just proceed like this. I'm not sure
That's
how.
okay.
As long as it's visible to everybody, I think it,
Yep.
it should be fine. So we're a publicly quoted company, so there's the inevitable disclaimer, which I expect none of you to read, but I'm obliged to show it to you all as a matter of course. So as mentioned, I'll touch on Evotec today and then move on to the Bridges model for accelerating academic innovation. So
Adam,
Evotec is, I guess, in the most
Adam,
simplistic.
you
Hello?
might be not advancing the slide. We're not seeing the slide being move forward.
Ah, okay.
You could perhaps press present in Teams button at the top.
No.
Oh, but it's not Teams.
We're,
Sorry, don't do
we're in
that.
Zoom, so that
Yes.
that may not
Um,
work.
if you go onto the slideshow button at the top, what happens then?
Display settings.
Yeah, it's gone to there. That's presentation mode. Can you move along the slides from there?
How's
There we
that?
go.
Does it
Yeah.
move along? If you try shifting, going to the next slide. Yep, that's
Yes.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent.
And that's on
T
disclaimer. So if you
yeah.
want to move one more,
Right.
yep,
T
that's fine. Great.
okay. Technical difficulties overcome.
Yeah.
Okay. So as I mentioned, in most simplistic terms, Evotec is a CRO. The core of our business is providing services to our partners that range from all of the world's largest pharma companies down to smaller biotechs, academic institutions, foundations, etc. But we are, I guess, have a slightly more interesting business model than your average CRO in that we conduct our own internal R&D into particular therapeutic areas and particular platform technologies. And then we bring this to collaborate with partners in a way that co-creates pipelines of new therapeutics. And essentially that creates programs where we have a financial interest in the asset downstream through receipt of typically milestones and royalties as those progress. funded by our partners through preclinical development into the clinic and hopefully to market. So we are, yes, a little bit more complicated. We have also been quite an active equity investor. So we have a portfolio of companies in which we have invested essentially as a corporate VC. Some of those aligning with strategic interests around platforms, but others directly relevant to the academic partnerships activity and the kind of new companies that we're creating at the back end of projects that we support through that route. In terms of what we do, we are primarily focused on preclinical discovery and development. So our sweet spot really is from going from the very early stages of target identification through to IND readiness. On the CMC side, we do go right the way through to commercial, however, both for small molecules and biologics, and indeed in Abingdon, we have commercial API manufacturing alongside those earlier discovery and development activities. We are also multi-modality, so we started as a small molecule chemistry company. Our roots are in an Oxford spin-out going back to 1989. But we now have very broad capabilities across small molecules, biologics, peptides, increasingly in oligonucleotides, and particularly in terms of internal R&D in cell therapies, particularly based on iPSCs. So I mentioned we have this co-owned pipeline of assets. These number now more than 140, 18 of which are in the clinic. These are all being progressed by our partners rather than ourselves, but we have a financial interest in these. And that reflects more than 15 billion euros of non-risk adjusted partnership milestones. Clearly, we're not going to get all of those, but even a small fraction would be nice. And typically receiving a royalty rate of between 8 and 10% on those, reflecting the contribution that we bring technically to these programs. And then geographically, we're headquartered in Hamburg, but we have major R&D sites outside of Hamburg, in Abingdon in the UK, in Toulouse in France, which is our oncology centre of excellence, and Verona in Italy, and then a number of smaller sites with more specific capabilities, and a growing presence in the US on both the east and west coasts. So that was a very brief background to Evotec and our capabilities. And hopefully that gives you a sense as to the kind of depth and breadth of what we do. We work across a very broad range of therapeutic areas. And all this meant that we realized a decade or so ago that we were very well positioned to bring these platforms to support academic institutions, which in many cases had a very broad spread of early therapeutic opportunities, which were in need of commercial guidance and platforms to progress expediently to value inflection points. So we came up with this bridge model. And really, the whole focus of the academic partnerships team and the bridge model is to unlock that potential within academic innovation, and of course, which many of you are funding through your respective charities. And the key characteristics of the bridge model are really that we are taking very early stage academic therapeutic concepts and then leveraging industrial capabilities to progress them as rapidly and robustly as possible through to proof of concept. So for each of our bridge partnerships, we typically bring together, obviously, Evotec as the partner undertaking the majority of the work, either one or more typically a group of academic partners providing the starting points, the projects, and then one or more financial investors. And these could be pharma companies, and we work with the likes of Amgen, Novo Nordisk, Bristol Myers Squibb, all classic VCs. And I'll come on to some of those in due course. We try to ensure that we can provide really quite significant amounts of funding per project. And I'm sure you all know that drug discovery is an expensive business. And I think what we've found over the years is that in order for us to have confidence that we can go from a really early starting point, maybe just a novel target, perhaps with a tool compound, through to ideally initial in vivo proof of concept, we need at least 1.5 million to get there, in some cases more. And so typically our bridge programs provide this quantum of funding. And that gives us good confidence that we can do this with a small molecule, with an antibody, with a peptide, etc. Another key characteristic is that we, wherever we can, embed an Evotec expert in residence, a drug hunter, somebody with huge experience in assessing early stage therapeutics projects and who can help to do that initial informal triage, decide what goes forward to joint steering committees for funding proposals, but also who can work with the wider Evotec team to ensure that the experimental plans that are put forward for funding are industry quality, that align with the expectations of downstream investment partners. And then we also try to ensure that we have as much transactional efficiency. So if we support a project through one of our bridge partnerships, and that project yields good data that we think can underpin a new company or potentially a license, we don't want to be starting from scratch in every time, in every instance, and then taking months to negotiate agreements. So what we typically do with these strategic partnerships is, under a framework agreement, predefine the license and spin-out terms that would apply to any successful project downstream. And that means that we can move really quickly from completing projects to forming new companies or executing licenses. And I should also say that for each of our bridge partnerships where we have our academic partners, they're entirely optional. The academic partner is not obliged to put forward projects, but understanding what the downstream commercial terms look like, what the funding envelope is, allows them to work out whether this is the right funding mechanism for the right project. But we've found in a great many examples that this is a value proposition that resonates, and we've built a very deep pipeline of projects off the back of this. But ultimately, what are we trying to do with this? We're trying to ensure that we are generating robust, reproducible, and trusted data. So building more investable propositions downstream. We're also seeking to really accelerate the process to make sure that we're condensing those timeframes from idea to achieving proof of concept and then securing follow-on funding. Obviously, in typical or traditional academic grant scenarios, it can be highly sequential with sort of stop-start processes. We're seeking to really condense this and accelerate it. And then what do we want to see at the back end? We want to see new startup companies and new licensing opportunities. So that's interesting. It seems to be missing a slide here. So this all started in Oxford back in 2017 when we set up a partnership called Lab 282. Lab 282 brought together the university as a source of projects, Evotec, located just down the road, as the partner to actually undertake the majority of the work, and Oxford Science Enterprises, as it's now called, as the large investment fund that had been set up shortly before that, that was looking to build a better pipeline of projects for them to invest in. And at that point, I was leading all of Oxford's tech transfer activities. So my interest in this was to improve that pipeline of opportunities. Obviously, Oxford has no shortage of world-class basic medical research. What it didn't have was the robust pipeline of therapeutics coming out of that we would have expected. And so the creation of Lab 282 was really a way to, in fairly experimental terms, see if we could accelerate the development of that pipeline of therapeutic prospects. So what did this look like? It was a 5-year commitment initially, that was then extended. OSE provided around £17 million of capital to support it, initially allocating about £250,000 per project. We soon realized that given the very early starting points that were truly novel, we needed to increase this, so we did to £500,000. And this was a key point of learning for future bridges, which informs the sort of 1.5 million project quantum that we work with now. But Lab 282, as I say, was a bit experimental when we set it up. So over the course of, or from 2017 onwards, we looked at well over 100 project opportunities coming out of the university. And these were assessed and triaged by an Evotec expert in residence who was working really very closely embedded with the university and the TTO. We had about 30 projects, well, no, more than 60 went to the Joint Steering Committee for funding. About 30 of those were approved for funding. And out of that, we generated about a dozen data sets that provided a potential basis to attract follow-on funding. Now, the original aspiration was to form new single asset companies at the back end of this. As mentioned, the quantum of funding we discovered was in most cases not sufficient to take these projects to the level of proof of concept that we originally envisaged. So initial in vivo proof of concept with an early lead molecule. So although we'd originally anticipated setting up new companies around single projects, we determined this wasn't viable, and instead took a different approach to combine a number of projects into a single spin-out company in a portfolio. And this led to the formation of Dark Blue Therapeutics. So Dark Blue Therapeutics is a spin-out created based on Lab 282 projects in 2020, brought together 5 small molecule precision medicine projects, so all with strong biomarker strategies, all at the kind of hit to lead stage, and attracted investment from Evotec, from OSE as the fund, but also from Bristol Myers Squibb, obviously a fantastic validation of the quality of projects coming out that one of the world's leading pharma companies was persuaded to invest in this. So seed round in 2020, additional funding rounds in 22 and 24. And then fairly hot off the press, announced just in the last couple of weeks, Dark Blue Therapeutics was acquired by Amgen for $840 million. So the first exit from the bridge portfolio. Fantastic for us to get those programs into the hands of a company, obviously with huge resources to progress those towards patient benefit. The lead program is very novel, degrading 2 proteins that are responsible for driving certain types of acute myeloid leukemia. And they're at the point where they have just nominated their clinical candidates. So obviously we hope with Amgen, we can advance very quickly to IND and into the clinic for that. So great proof of concept for the model, if you like. And sorry, this just shows the, I think the stats that I talked about before, so the slide order must have got slightly mixed up there. So Evotec then, after Lab 282, really saw this was a model that could translate or be exported globally. And so over the next decade or so, we have created a number of very similar partnerships with different investors, different academic institutions across 3 continents, but all with that same basic premise, taking early academic starting points, progressing rapidly to proof of concept, leveraging Evotec's expertise and platforms, and kind of building in the investment partners into those partnerships so that we can move very quickly into new company formation and licensing. So I won't go through all of these in detail, but left to right is essentially chronological order of when these were set up. And you can see in terms of investment partners, we have some of the pharma partners I mentioned, Amgen, BMS, Novo Nordisk, various VCs, and a growing pipeline underneath of projects that are coming out of those. Most of these partnerships were established essentially as just contractual partnerships. There was no separate legal entity created as a vehicle. But for a number of these, the startup studios that you can see labeled at the top, in order to enable the typically VC investment to support these pre-incorporation programs, we had to create a separate funding vehicle as a legal entity. And in some cases, those have their own separate management teams. Evotec is still working to support them, but the sourcing of projects is done by the startup studio rather than the Evotec expert in residence. But otherwise, they work in very similar fashion. And this just shows the broad range of academic partners that we have across the different bridge partnerships. As you can see, although Lab 282 is unusual in just having a single, albeit very large and high quality academic partner, in most cases we've brought together groups of academic institutions to really generate the critical mass required to build the kind of portfolios that we aspire to with each of these bridge programs. And often these represent a kind of regional focus. I'd say the model works particularly well when it is focused on academic institutions within a particular region. In other cases, they're a little bit more widely spread. So, our other partnership in the UK, BE Lab 1407, you can see with Birmingham, Nottingham, Dundee, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Bristol, Queen Mary, clearly a pretty broad geographical spread there. Others, so the sister version of that, BE Lab 2122, is a fairly kind of tightly bound group of institutions in southern Germany. But really, we're leveraging an incredible engine of academic innovation across these bridges, and total research funding in medical research across these is into the several billions. So just to give a bit of insight into kind of what the kind of typical bridge projects look like, in terms of therapeutic area focus, probably no surprise, it maps onto where the majority of research funding is spent in universities. So cancer being particularly dominant. Beyond that, autoimmunity and inflammation, real critical mass there, and then quite a bit in infectious disease and neurology. But I'd say some growing areas in the sort of smaller slices, particularly metabolic disease, which has obviously become much more popular in the last few years. And then in terms of project stage, most of the projects that we're focused on are single assets, also single target assets. Most of those are, we're starting the project prior to any significant screening taking place. So a lot of the project work is to, for small molecules, to undertake the assay development, to run the high throughput screens, and then to progress the hits coming out of those. In many cases, there's additional target validation work to do, and actually often that's where the university partners do some of the project work to further enhance that aspect. Or in some cases, they may have particular models they've developed for screening that we can feed into that process. But for things like high throughput screening, obviously most institutions don't have that capability, and that's where we can really leverage Evotec's industrial platforms. So in terms of what the model provides to investment partners, there's a number of, I guess, elements of the value proposition. The first is that ability to access these multimodality platforms in one place, and it gives investment partners a very efficient route to progress novel projects in a quite modality agnostic manner. Most of our bridges are not very narrowly focused in terms of disease area, but there is the flexibility to do that. Our most recent partnership, which is with Novo Nordisk, is aligned very much with their disease area focus, for example, within cardiometabolic disorders. But others are much broader in scope. But essentially, it aligns with the strategic focus of our investment partners. One really important element is that we try to make sure that the vast majority of funding is spent on projects. And I think over the years we've been invited to partner on new what are called bricks and mortar accelerators or incubators. where they're being set up with at least basic in vitro biology labs. And when we look at the financials underpinning those, actually a huge amount of the funding is going on the running of those facilities. What we're seeking to do is to leverage what already exists at Evotec and make sure that the project funding that's coming from our investment partners is really being spent on that rather than creating and maintaining additional and sometimes redundant overhead. Investors certainly like the pre-agreed license terms. That reduces the risk for them. It increases the efficiency of progressing to transaction on completed successful projects. And there's flexibility in the model to accommodate single assets, which represent the majority of projects, but also platform opportunities. So, for example, our partnership in Singapore is with a syndicate of VC investors out there, and that's much more focused on opportunities that embody novel platforms from which we can then support the development of multiple assets. And also, our investors like the fact that they can really get under the skin of academic partners to find truly novel projects. And I think that's something that this on-site expert in residence is really enabling for. I think too often, and I know this from being on the other side of the fence, investors, pharma companies will come along to an institution and essentially look at what's on the shelf in the TTO. What we found with the bridge model is actually the most innovative projects are often those that are still in basic research, and where the researchers may not have the entrepreneurial experience, the translational capabilities to progress those. And so what we're wanting to do is to really find those gems that need to achieve escape velocity and to enable that to happen. For our academic partners, they're able to really leverage Evotec's capabilities and experience in working with a very wide range of different academic partners. We know the sensitivities that our academic partners have in terms of putting together those framework agreements. We're able to, I think, mediate very effectively between pharma or VC investment partners and those institutions to come up with agreements and value propositions that are really truly equitable. Clearly, academic institutions don't typically have access to the kind of breadth and depth of industry discovery platforms and indeed funding that we can offer through Bridges. So, I think that is a fairly compelling value proposition for all of our partners. And also they get to leverage this additional expertise embodied in the expert in residence. Often somebody who has a level of experience that would be challenging to afford in terms of tech transfer offices and their budgetary constraints. So this really provides them with an extension, a very valuable extension of their resources. And the pre-agreed terms actually also work to the advantage of the university in that it gives PIs real transparency as to what they can expect downstream if a project is successful, and on that basis decide whether it's the right mechanism for them or not. So the EIR role I've touched on already. It's something which I think we've found to be really enabling as part of the portfolio of partnerships. It works best when there's a high level of trust within the relationship. We see, I think, a lot of variety in terms of how academic partners, or the extent to which they're willing to give this kind of role direct access to academics. Quite frankly, it works best when that direct access is facilitated, as it was at Oxford and as it is with a number of other academic partners that we have. In some cases, our academic partners prefer it to be a bit more of an arm's length relationship and to have the TTO as much more kind of gating in showing projects. And we can work with all varieties of that model, but I think ultimately we want them to be having that direct engagement with faculty, and obviously working hand in hand with the TTO in ensuring that there is a very joined up relationship there. And we've had great feedback from the PIs as well that we've worked with in terms of the value of having somebody with that experience that they can engage with, very informally. Often, there could be half a dozen conversations before it's agreed that there is something that could go forward for funding. It's quite difficult to have that frequency of dialogue without somebody who is spending a lot of time in those partner institutions. And ultimately, this role is really combining the sourcing, marketing, and alliance management responsibilities for the partnership. And I guess the other key element is that they act as a front door to the much wider Evotec team of experts to make sure that we can provide that advice on industry standard project plans from the outset. So in terms of where we are with the bridge model, we are fortunate, as mentioned, to work with a tremendous innovation engine across our academic partner institutions, leveraging north of $25 billion of research funding. The program has supported more than 125 projects to date. Still a number of those are still active and running, so not all of these are completed. We've had more than 300 million capital committed. So obviously that gives us some real firepower in ensuring that we're able to take projects far enough to really robust proof of concept. We've had more than 15 projects that have received follow-on investment from different commercial entities, which is great validation. 8 different newcos have now been created across the different bridge partnerships. And as of January, we have our first exit. So we have Dark Blue Therapeutics now having returned money to Evotec and our investors, and indeed our academic institutions and PIs there. So a very important landmark for us, and hopefully the first of many. So beyond bridges, Evotec works with, as I mentioned, a huge range of different partners. That does include foundations and charities. So just to give a couple of examples, we have a long-standing relationship with CHDI Foundation to discover new drugs to treat Huntington's disease. That was extended sort of a year and a half ago or so. And we also work with the Gates Foundation on a significant number of different projects. Example here in women's health, but we do a significant amount in tuberculosis as well. And so we're very used to working with not just kind of private sector organizations, but with public sector universities, charities, and foundations to support their goals. And then lastly, kind of beyond Evotec, really, I just wanted to highlight some work which I've been doing with 10U really as the primary convener, a proof of concept working group, which is focused on really building a stronger case for policymakers around the critical role of proof of concept funding in building new spin-outs, in translating university innovations into commercial and societal impact, and making sure not only that we have sufficient proof of concept funding available in the UK to support, to kind of unlock that academic potential, but also that we're deploying it in the most effective and efficient manner, which improves the probability of success, that maximizes the positive outcomes. So to date, and we started this activity as Q1 last year, we've focused on defining, making a robust proof of concept definition, and really we see it very much as that final piece of funding that can deliver a project with sufficient validation for an industry partner or investor to get their checkbook out. We are looking at best practice and taking inspiration from a number of different schemes across the UK. We are very much advocating the value of public-private partnerships. So bringing together, as we do with Evotec's bridge model, relevant public sector organizations with investors, with industry, and to have that collaboration as far upstream in the process as possible. So to ensure that that industry insight is being brought to bear from the very earliest stages, and to make sure that that alignment is there right the way through the process. Obviously, this is most easily achieved with sector-specific initiatives, and so we're looking at the potential for more focused challenges or vehicles with a sector-specific focus. And we're also trying to tackle the question of return on investment for proof of concept funders, and what is reasonable, and clearly that may vary depending on the nature of that funder, whether it be government, whether it be charities, whether it be private sector, but looking at different models there, and what might fit with different approaches. We are aiming ultimately to publish a report by the end of Q2 this year. We are working on a draft at the moment. We are in the process of holding a number of roundtables with sort of specific groups of constituents, and delighted that we'll be holding a TAR network roundtable next week to get into a bit more detail about the proposed areas of focus, recommendations of the report, and to make sure that it is reflecting the feedback needs of charitable funders when it comes to proof of concept. So very much looking forward to that.